Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Roberts. I'm the Director of Education at the Dallas Opera, and I'm here with my fabulous colleague and co-host.
Quo Johnson, Education and Company Culture Manager for the Dallas Opera.
And we are sashaying through again with another episode of Taking the Stage with Kristian
and Quo. One of the things we've started doing, and one of the things we will continue to do for every episode, is a land and people acknowledgement. We do this to acknowledge that while we have inherited these situations, we did not create them. We do have the opportunity, we have the obligation, we have the honor to focus on connection and reducing harm and uplifting our communities. So with this, I would like to acknowledge that Dallas is on stolen land. We are on the land of the Caddo, of the Wichita, and of the Comanche sovereign nations, nations that were forcefully removed from their home, nations that faced genocide and policy that allowed for removal by any means necessary. I also want to take the time to acknowledge that Dallas is built by stolen labor. People were stolen from their homes and brought here and forced into slave labor. We want to take the time to uplift these communities. We want to take the time to uplift the voices of the descendants of these powerful communities, and then to continue to move forward so that we can do so in connection. And with that, I thank you for joining me for this land and people acknowledgement.
And we thank you for joining us on the show today. We want to say a shout out, as always, to the Dallas Opera and thank everyone on the staff, particularly our friend, David Lomeli.
Hey, David. Every time.
We always, every time, we got to get him every time. We have to mess with him every time. So, Quo, today we have a guest with us, someone who has I've heard about from you. Do you want to introduce yourself, or shall we have Quo do it? Because I don't know, there's a red carpet somewhere.
So I would love to put Quo's marketing skills to use in introducing
Oh!
That's wild. Yeah. Coming to Taking the Stage, we have none other than Mr. Michael Crowley. Now, for those of you who do not know, Michael is also a faculty member at Goucher College, which is how I met him and had the opportunity to learn from his wealth of knowledge, his love for marketing, for art, for connecting communities through marketing and data-informed processes. Now, that's all the nice way to say that, right? La, 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 la. My way of saying that is Michael's pretty dope. Wonderful artist, wonderful spirit, wonderful soul, who has the opportunity in so many ways to help shape how we move forward in art, how we move forward in connecting people, and how we move forward in making sure that we're relevant in what we're doing. So with that, I will stop blabbing. And Michael, if you want to go ahead and let them know more about all of your awesomeness.
Thank you. That was lovely. I love that. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. So good to be here. As Quo mentioned, I am on the faculty at Goucher College's MAAA Master in Arts Administration, where I had the privilege of working with Quo a couple semesters ago. But my full-time job, I work at a marketing and advertising and strategy firm called LaPlaca Cohen, which is based in New York City. So I am a full-time arts marketer. And as Quo said, I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity I have on a daily basis to work with clients to really help them grow their audiences, which I think has taken on such different meaning over the past 8 months. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity. But it's been a very circuitous route getting to where I am today. That began with like a little tap dancing boy and has landed now with this buttoned up, guy talking about marketing. So that's me.
So can we get into that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
I like to give people a little background. I love for people to have a little background, and I'm just curious about your path into arts and performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised, like most sort of boys in the 80s, put into sports early on, and I was just super bored. I mean, like there, a VHS video somewhere of me in the outfield in a little baseball game, hopping up and down and making up dances because I was just bored. So my parents very rightly put me in dance class. They were like, okay, he's probably more suited for the arts. And I think I was 5 years old, and the dance recital, it was all girls and I was the boy. The dance was called the Bunny Jamboree, and you had little bunny tails and little patent leather tap shoes, and that was it. I mean, I was bit. I was very fortunate in that my mom grew up in New York City. So I grew up in DC, but we went to trips to New York City since before I could remember. It was back in the old days when like dad would drive us to the airport, like walk us onto the plane, right? Pre-TSA, we'd fly up to New York. And so I remember arts and culture and sort of commercial Broadway before. My earliest memories are like of being in like old Times Square, right? Not by myself as a child, like surely with my family, but it was always just a source of inspiration for me. So I think, you know, I just got bit really early and then started doing, you know, amateur arts throughout the Baltimore, DC area. I was a child actor, so I had a little manager and agent and all that jazz, and used to go up to New York for auditions, and you know, and did some good nonprofit theater around the DC area too. So it's interesting looking back now because of course I love performing and I love the whole creative process, but there's a lot of early memories. I mean, looking at like posters for the show and having thoughts about the village it took, right? Like I remember being in a show at the Studio Theater in DC and like stopping and asking about why the poster was a certain sort of color, right? And my dad actually built a stage in our basement. So I had like a stage with like, you know, 2 sheets for the curtain, right? And I had a LaPlaca camera. And I remember, I think I was like 8 years old. And I decided to make a season subscription. So I made a season brochure. I went to the local library and made copies. And I went door to door in my neighborhood selling like, I don't know, 4 plays for $3, like an actual subscription plan. So I was doing arts marketing and asking those questions before I even knew what it was. So it was really interesting because then like, once I got to New York, I did my undergrad at Tisch in musical theater, and, you know, was very, very grateful and privileged to have opportunity in performing. So I did like, you know, I graduated at age 20 and like went on the road with 3 different Broadway tours, right? Back to back. So I was able to do the thing. But then again, I was like, wait, why is the poster that color? Or why are we sold out when we come to Dallas, but then when we go to Austin, we're not sold out? Sort of like asking those questions. So that was always interesting to me. And then the real is that I got really bored easily. So, you know, 8 shows a week for me wasn't as fulfilling once I was doing the thing, right? And I'll probably get in trouble for telling the story, but I was on a national tour of a Broadway show, 42nd Street. And you know, it was a huge ensemble, like amazing, gorgeous production, amazing, talented cast. But I was so bored. And we had this big number called We're in the Money, where everyone's kicking. And so we used to play a game called Pass the Penny. So I would take a penny and just hand it to somebody, and they had to sort of finish the number holding a penny, which is, you know, not ideal. And I remember, and it was actually in Dallas at the music fair. We were playing the Dallas
Music hall.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I remember we decided to play Pass the McDonald's 99-cent hamburger. So we like gave, you know what I mean, just like crazy stuff. And I would get written up in the stage management report, and they'd be like, why did you do that? And I was always just like, I was bored, right? Which is like horrible thing to say when you're living your dream, right? So I very quickly realized that I should put that boredom to better use. So what I would do is whenever I would get to another town, I would schedule interviews with the head of the theater, the head of the marketing, and just ask them a million questions. And it was through that process that I found out what the whole nonprofit ecosystem was in our country, right? I got through almost my whole education in undergrad. I didn't learn about the business of theater. So it took me asking the right questions to say, wait, hold on. So you're a community focused organization, but we're all actors from New York, right? Sort of the wheels started spinning for me, right? So it was through that interrogation that I realized I want to run a theater company. So I decided I wanted to get a degree, because I assumed one had to have a degree to do that. One doesn't. And that's how I found the program at Goucher. So because it's distance learning, I was able to perform like on the road with these shows and take classes, right? I mean, there were even times where if I had a class at 7 p.m. and it ended at 8, if the class went a minute long, like you would hear the overture playing, like I would do class in my little costume and I'd say, sorry guys, I got to run, like the overture's on, and I would leave class and then go do the show. So I was able to transition from performer to arts administrator through this thing called distance learning, which now we're all doing because of the pandemic, right? And that's really how I fell into it. I never intended to do marketing. I always wanted to run a theater company. And my dream was to sort of work at the Roundabout Theater, which was, when I was undergrad, Roundabout was the one they were doing all the major revivals. So it's really how I got to see, the modern classics was through Roundabout. And through this program at Goucher, I got an internship there and realized very quickly, I actually didn't want to run a theater company. Through that internship, I started going to these things called ad meetings, right? So they would go over to their ad agency, this place called Spotco, and there'd be a meeting for an hour and a half every week where they would look at their sales and they would decide, okay, well, if this show isn't selling, what can we change about it, right? And it was usually how they were talking about it, what they were showing. And that was so fascinating to me, right? It's where the nonprofit and the commercial sector really met. And it was all around this marketing table and just like really big decisions were being made, right? About what actors they were going to bring in to replace. And this was really when social media and digital media was taking off in the mid to late aughts, 2000s. So I remember being like, okay, this is fascinating to me. And, ended up getting a job at that ad agency, as luck would have it. So I found my way in a really odd way and haven't looked back. And feel again really grateful that I sort of entered the field at that sort of digital divide, right? Like that I was sort of young enough to sort of be on the ground floor, but also a bit old enough that I had enough experience to be the one in the room saying, okay, you do need an Instagram account for your theater company, et cetera, right? So it was a wild journey, but I'm grateful for my performing background because I think it really helps me show up in much more authentic ways when I'm working with creatives. And I always say, whether it's a Broadway show I was working on or with a client now, right, like a museum or a major theater company, I always say, like, as an arts marketer, I think I have two jobs, right? One is to make sure you have a full and diverse audience, right? Because like no actor wants to perform to an empty house, and no actor wants to perform to a house of all people who look the same, right? So like, I want to get people here for you. And number two, I want to do it in a way that's authentic to the experience that you're going to be providing, right? Like no one wants to be pandered to in marketing. I always say under promise, over deliver. But that's it. And like, that's what I get to do all day is get people to show up to usually really cool stuff. And to do it in a way that actually honors the creative process. And I think being a performer helps me do that second part in a way that I probably wouldn't be able to do if I were just somebody who like went to school for, budgets and marketing and all that stuff. So yeah, that's my journey.
There is a lot in that entire journey. And that's the short version of it.
That is the short version of it.
But there's so much even in that concise version because like, I think that part of, even in education, even in what I do, the fact that I am a singer and I have degrees in vocal performance and that I have been on the stage, would very much like to be back on the stage right now. I mean, I think it does make a difference. And I'm not saying that has to be the end all be all, but that the way you talked about your approach and the way you approach when you're working with actors, you already know what's going on.
Yeah.
And the fact that when you market, nobody wants to play to an empty house. That is so real. And I've had so many conversations with fellow artists who will talk about just how it drains their energy when they're on the stage, when they look out and they don't see the house as full as we want it to be. So that is absolutely real. I love it, Mike.
And I love that you said that because I think so much of marketing the arts in our country has been just sort of keeping everything afloat, right? It's like just enough, right? We just enough marketing to get, just enough audiences, just enough donations, et cetera. And I think what we can do as marketers, it's alchemy, right? Like making sure that the right ingredients are in place to spark magic every night, knowing that it's always going to be different, right? But I think that that's the opportunity we have is to help create that magic. And I always say like the experience begins from that first touch point is that piece of collateral, right? Whether it's in your mailbox or an ad you see on a website or social media, like that is the first touch point to the experience. It isn't even when people show up, it's before they buy the ticket. So there's so much that goes into that. And yeah, I think if you're somebody who loves it and has a passion for it, then it's going to be that much richer, you know?
That's fantastic. Quo.
um, yeah, that's a lot.
It's weighted. It really is, because
It's a lot. And in what you've shared thus far, it's just this beautiful example of how having access, but then you spoke about village, right? And what it
Mm-hmm.
means to have all those things in place to be able to move forward. I hear so much about accountability in that you're being bored and you're causing trouble.
mhm,
But what it means to say, you know what, why don't I take this and do this and go forward?
Yeah.
And then to have the opportunity to learn so that you can truly kind of determine whether or not this is for you, and
Mm-hmm.
then to be able to find the path for it, knowing that you don't have to separate the skills that you already have, but you can use it to build upon the
Right.
skills that you have and the skills that you need to do the things that you want to do in the arts. If organizations took that approach, just that, right? Just focusing on village, focusing on the opportunity to learn, focusing on listening and learning, and then applying, and then being accountable when something does not work, and then
Mm-hmm.
continuing to kind of find that path so that you are in a space where you're connecting people with your art. It's brilliant in so many ways. And then the conversation about nobody wants to perform to an empty house. So often I say that the art itself is not the art, right? It's the moment you're connecting with those people in the space.
mhm,
It's the moments that those hearts are in sync, those heartbeats are in sync. It's the moment that people are laughing, that energy. That is truly the art. And so when you're continuously pushing and giving with no one else to receive and to give in the
Mm-hmm.
same manner, it becomes this exhausting experience on stage. And you're just like, well, this is great. Because we're not able to make art. And so we have to be mindful of the messages that we're sending and the effort that we put into connecting to others, to communicating with others, and doing so properly. And as you said, authentically, so
Yeah.
that we can make art, right? The
Yeah.
concept of just being on stage, that's not the art. It's not enough. You got to go farther, right? So.
Yeah, and I would also just say, like, encouraging everyone, especially young entry level
mhm,
artists, to like zoom out and see the whole picture, right? Because I think so much of my early life was so focused. It was like, I'm going to be an actor and I want to be on I was, and I think that's not specific to the arts. I think any sort of ambitious,
mhm,
any young person who has a dream
Mhm.
is going to be very sort of honed in on that mission, so to speak. And I think in the arts we perpetuate that, right? Like,
Yeah.
we live in a very a capitalist society that awards the best in everything, right? And I think it's so easy to encourage youth, especially talented youth, to just drill down on that one thing. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities I had just to step back and go, whoa, like, this
mhm,
does take a village. Is there a role for me in another part of this that doesn't require me being in the spotlight, right?
Mhm.
And I think that in this moment, what we're seeing is so many, because everything's just getting torn down,
Yes.
and we're just at the stage where we're starting to rebuild. I think there's a lot of room for artists to have more active voices and or be the people who are doing the marketing, who are doing the fundraising, because the system we have in place was barely hanging on by a thread to begin with, right? And I think that what we're going to see, what I'm already seeing, is the actor slash director slash marketer slash, like,
mhm.
that's what we need. And I think those actually are the those well-rounded people. I those are the people I want on my team, right? Like, I probably would be loath to hire someone who is like just one thing, right? I want someone who can come to the table with all those skills.
Well, and that is the gospel truth. I mean, that is a word, okay? Because even right now, in the approach that and this will segue into my next question, but the approach that we take in education, particularly in opera education, I can speak that we speak to all the ways that it can feel, that it can that it can build a pipeline into many different parts of the field. It's
Right.
not just getting up on stage and singing. Yes, opera is singing. We have that, but it's also stage management, stage director, orchestra, arts
Carpenter.
administrators, your marketing team, your finance team. I mean, all of these
Mhm.
things that make that world go round. And I love the fact that you had adults in your life, and also not when you were younger, but also had, arts administrators who were willing to take your question as an artist when you came and
Yeah.
asked,
Right.
who were open. And that is very much huge, because if you didn't have that, I mean, where would you be if they slammed the door in your face and
Absolutely.
said, you don't need to really worry about that. Just, just go sing and tap,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I commend those people in your life for doing that. And that sort of brings me to my next section, because you are an educator,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you're this, bomb marketer, but you're an educator, like, and you're putting that, and you're teaching back at the same school that you went to, where you went, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so what sort of led into you going into the educational part of this?
Yeah. I mean, I never in a million years thought I'd be teaching, especially at the graduate level. But I think because I came out of that grad program at the time I did, which was this digital divide in the arts, right? I mean, I think the arts have historically been, 3 to 5 years behind the corporate sector, as it were, in their use of technologies, especially around marketing. So I think because of when I finished the program at Goucher and when I started getting my professional experience, it became evident that I could actually just cycle back in as a guest, as an adjunct faculty member, just to start peppering in more information about how to use digital media in terms of diversifying and broadening our audiences, right? So, the everyone at Goucher was like, great, come on down to Baltimore. We'd love to have you. And then it very quickly became why don't I co-teach? And then it quickly became, why don't I revise the course? And what's great is that I think I'm on almost my 10th year of teaching. I think maybe this is my 9th. I'm now seeing students in my course who have far more experience than I ever will in the areas of digital media. So it's this beautiful circle where I'm learning now from the questions they're bringing to class, from the case studies, from the work they're doing in the organizations, that I'm able to provide the historical context, right? Because the history of digital media and the arts is a short history.
Yeah.
But it's great to sort of already see that full circle happening with the students. And because, again, the nature of the program is distance learning, I'm learning a ton about the cultural ecosystems of Dallas, of, all places all over the country, really, and the world, frankly, where students are coming from, that I wouldn't necessarily have on my radar based upon, where I live, right, which is in New York. So that's been really great to see too, as a faculty member. And then lastly, I think just this moment, being in a classroom setting with young, currently emerging and future leaders in the arts is the best place to be, frankly, because these are the folks who are going to be figuring it out, right? Like, someone will figure out the new subscription model for opera companies, and it's probably going to be someone in my class, right? Like, that to me is the reason I get jazzed to show up to class every week. It's not necessarily even to hear, what everyone thought about the reading or the assignment. It's just what's on your brain this week, right? As a young leader in this moment, and how are you going to solve it, right? How are you going to be a part of the new model? That is the stuff that gets me jazzed.
That's so cool. It really is. Like, it's the epitome of what to me, of what an educator, should be. They're constantly learning, but also constantly finding those circles and finding those ways to connect. So kudos to you. And I know, because there's someone on this very call who has brought evidence of that, and has come and sung your praises more than once, and when we were at the offices. So I know you're doing the work out there.
Yeah. Well, you were probably asking, like, you were like, Michael said we should be doing this. Are we doing this? No, yeah. I mean, it is great that the students take things back. I mean, the thing about, I think, all grad level programs is that you should be able to take what you're learning, and immediately ask those questions in your own organizations, be it the arts or otherwise. So I find that my role is more of a facilitator, that it's really facilitating information so that the students can go back to their own organizations and say, hey, are we doing this? Or, oh, we are, great. I want to know about it, because I might not be in the marketing department, but this could actually really apply to what we're doing in community outreach, et cetera. So it's finding those connections for people so they can take it into their own organizations and communities and sort of blow it up,
Very cool.
And even in what you're saying, kind of the people you want on your team and the way that you approach the work, It's so brilliant because we recently had David come back as a guest. And he's like, the opera field right now is for the people who are bold. It's for the creative. It's for the people who are really to take the risks. But even before that, we had Byron Sanders, who is the executive director for Big Thought. And he was saying that just that creative and that design thinking, that's what people are looking for. The ability to be flexible, the ability to take this concept, look at it in different ways, and then apply it in different ways, and not so much just a specialized approach to learning or that specialized approach to skill building. And so having the opportunity to just be creative in a creative field, right? That double, triple creativity that builds exponentially. It's brilliant in the way that it's necessary in what we do.
Yeah, and I was going to add, and also just getting out of your own way, right? Like that's some advice I got early on, because again, I was the little actor in me was so focused on the job or the gig or the next thing. And I almost had this idea of how everything had to be. And that translated to my work as an arts administrator. And I really had to and this is something I continue working on, through therapy and meditation and through some amazing colleagues in my place of work now, which is just to sort of like get out of your own way and like let go so that you can be open to different ways in, different perspectives and different roles, right? Like I love marketing. I probably will do it for a long time, but who knows, right? I might go into fundraising. I might end up wanting to run a company. I don't know, but I think that being open is so important, especially in the arts when, it's a struggle. Like the struggle is real. So I think being able to shapeshift, like that's my new favorite term right now that I'm using. It's like shapeshifters are welcome here, right? Like we need more people who can sort of do it all, right? Without burning themselves out, right? Like that's the caveat that self-care is really a paramount in these times, but so is shapeshifting.
So is shapeshifting.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a Star Trek nerd, so I hear shapeshifter and I'm immediately thinking about Odo right now.
Yeah.
But I think it is important because I remember a couple years back, I was reading a study, and it might have been I think it was in 2012. It might have been a little bit later than that. But they were talking with, folks who were doing the hiring for corporate, positions. Right. And something like, I think 75% of them said that they were looking for people who had the skills that only the arts could create. Like that well-rounded thinking, that skill set, that innovative thinking, that creative mindset, that out-of-the-box thinking. And there were a lot of businesses that were pouring a lot of money into professional development because they saw that there was a need for that. And I was like, keep your babies in the arts. I just kept saying, keep the arts in the schools. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to go be an artist, okay? But it does give them a well-rounded view, and it helps them think outside of the box and to think in creative ways. Yeah. And they said they needed that kind of skill and that kind of talent that only participating in the arts could foster. Yeah. And I think it's just so interesting, even hearing your story and even hearing how your parents were like, that boy is dancing on the baseball field. He needs to be in dance. Yeah. Like noticing and not forcing you to stay somewhere or anything like that. I mean, really. And then the fact that you, even as a child, you were like, I'm gonna go knock doors in my neighborhood and hand out some flyers and sell tickets. You know what I mean? Like that's huge. Yeah. That's huge. And so I think, from youth, this stuff is very, very important, especially being able to shapeshift, and being open. So,
well, and I think about arts education. Listen, I think there are certainly programs that are sort of, professional prep, right? There are clearly programs that are about training the next generation of professional opera singers and dancers. And those are very important. But I always have found that the programs that I'm drawn to as an adult, in terms of just my showing up, in terms of my giving or, mentoring students, are the programs that are less about we're training the next generation of Broadway performers, that are really more focused on the soft skills that these students develop, right? It's their confidence, it's their willingness to collaborate. Like those things are so transferable to anything in this world, right? And I think that if the arts are what bring that about, great. It doesn't mean you need to become an actor or an opera singer or a dancer, but if that's what's going to get you standing up straight and presenting in a room, then that's going to be the thing that catapults your political career, your corporate career, or your family life, right? It's how you show up and become open to one another. And I found that through the arts. I was a kind of precocious and confident little boy, but like horribly bullied, right? And it was through the arts and through my confidence in succeeding that I realized all that crap that they were yelling at me in middle school, while that was hard to deal with then, made me stronger. And it was the arts that helped me realize that, right?
Yeah, I think that's a word for the young people too. For real, because it does get tough when you're different and you're trying to do something different. So, and everybody else is doing something else. So,
even in that, I think it's also a call for the rest of us to create these environments where it's not so different. Or where it's not so strange, right? One of the things that took place kind of within my family and just in my younger brother's generation, right? And so he is hanging out with all of the football players, all of this, but to be the person who is in the sports or the football player, and then also is going to hop in to be Beast from Beauty and the Beast for a show, right? For the musical, to know that it's completely okay for you to be in all these different worlds and then to be the tech person and all of this. I think it's important that we understand how those environments of teamwork truly allow for us to be able to connect with one another in those spaces. And I mean, to even my brother, to the point where he was in the back calling the show, even though he only went just so he could give somebody something, and ended up calling the show backstage. He's like, I ended up with a headset and now I was calling the show. And then so from the team it was his cue. But having those experiences and then being able to translate those things, which is what we're speaking of, being able to transfer and translate those skills into other things and into the teamwork that is necessary. In my undergrad, I recall kind of going to business courses, and they were always talking about group assignments. And I was like, none of y'all know how to work together. Y'all need to join choir. You need to join concert chorale, because this is not teamwork. We should, everyone, every team, every business team should participate in the arts in that, just so that there's an experience of my part means nothing if everybody else is not able to do their part. My part means nothing if I am overshadowing everybody else. Like, this is where I fit in this court. This is where I fit in this life. This is where I fit in this work. So I completely agree. So that's a message to all of our young ones and to all of our adults and to all of our administrators. Just make it happen.
Yeah.
I think one of the best memories one of the coolest memories I have is I remember doing marching shows, when I was in high school in marching band, and some of the football players would be marching in pads. Like they would literally get off the football field, go grab their horn, and then do the marching show with us. They didn't have a halftime break, but they sort of weaved in and out of that jock role and that musician role that was assigned to them. They sort of broke that barrier, and I always found that really, really admirable. And I thought it was so cool. And it was nothing, nobody thought anything of it. Oh, so-and-so's, grabbing his horn, and here we go, he's marching trumpet tonight. But that's about that ensemble. So he was able to move between teams, so I always thought that was really, really cool, and I distinctly remember that. So let's go into your business.
Yes.
Right now, let's talk about your work with LaPlaca Cohen.
Yeah, it's absolutely. So LaPlaca Cohen is a strategy and marketing firm, right? So we have a host of clients around the country, and we either come up with their strategic visioning plans, their marketing plans, audience development plans, and we work across all disciplines. So museums, opera companies, theater companies, foundations, architecture firms, education. It's really, really great. The amount and breadth of our work is really just exciting, right? Like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, wait, who do I get to talk to today, right? It's thrilling. In addition, we also have a research arm in that we field a study called Culture Track. So this is a study that was first fielded in 2001 in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. And as the cultural sector was just grappling with A, how to respond, right? B, like, what do cultural consumers need in this moment? We decided to field a study that started to answer those questions. So that was almost 20 years ago, right? And here we are now, 20 years later, at another moment of crises in our nation's history.
Mm-hmm.
So between then and now, we fielded a study every 3 to 4 years. So it's a tracking study that allows us to see the trends, right? So, leading up to the pandemic about 9 months ago, we were already having really active conversations about the next fielding of Culture Track. So we were already planning to, go back out and ask the questions we ask every 3 or 4 years, which are, how do you define culture? What are you looking for in experience? What are the greatest motivators? What are the greatest barriers to entry? And no surprise, like those findings 3 years ago, like the number one barrier to entry to folks in 2017 was, it's not for me, right?
Mm.
And I think we hear that and go, yeah, but it's seeing that in numbers, right? Seeing that across 4,000 people across the country who are a representative sample of the ethnic, racial demographics and geodemographics of our nation, saying that in stereo, it's not for someone like me, then becomes something that you can hold up in a board meeting or in a community meeting, et cetera, and say, what are we doing to combat this, right? If this is what we're hearing across the country, then what are we doing in our community and our organization? So we were already planning on going back out with another version of that study, and then the world changed in February, March. And we very quickly decided to pivot and make this a study about COVID-19 initially, right? To say how, much like 9/11, how can we be of service? What do people need from culture, right? And this was before, we knew everyone was going to be going online, but this is before we saw, different opera and ballet and theater companies doing the thing. So this was really early in the pandemic when people were truly, truly in quarantine. And then the sort of social justice movement, as that really became vociferous, that became another inquiry route for the study, right? And then you added on the third crisis, which is the economic crisis. So we were really looking at this data and going, there's a lot here, and there's a lot of questions that the folks in the cultural sector need answered to be of service. So, we went out with this study, and typically we have partnered with a research firm who we sort of pay to play, and they go and find the people, the cultural consumers to get on the phone or all that good stuff. This time we partnered with Slover Linnet Audience Research, who's one of our colleague firms, and they're a really amazing audience research firm based out of Chicago. And we partnered together and said, let's actually go out to the field and ask organizations to send our survey out to their lists, right? So we were hoping maybe to get like 200 or 300 organizations. We got over 650 organizations in all 50 states to send out our survey, right? So because of that, we had almost 125,000 respondents. So we went from a study of 4,000 people to this becoming one of the largest cultural studies ever, right? So that was just really thrilling, exciting, that our little study became this huge national platform. And since then, because the numbers were so large, we've been really able to slice and dice the data as different questions come up, right? So certainly in terms of BIPOC audiences, we were able to go back to that data and really look specifically at African-American audiences, Latinx audiences, et cetera, and see how their needs and wants in this moment differ from white audiences. Mm-hmm. The other thing that, again, wasn't a surprise, but was helpful to be able to see bear out was the inherent whiteness of the lists that organizations sent our survey out to, right? When we got the responses back, we were able to hold that up to the field and say, it's not even a diversity problem in terms of the audiences showing up and engaging. There is a diversity problem in terms of who you're talking to, who you're speaking to about what you have been doing, right? So there's been so many ahas throughout this current edition rather of Culture Track. So there's a lot there I think we can talk about, but I also want to note before we dive into that we're going to go out with a second wave to this study in early 2021 to further probe a lot of questions we had asked, right? It's like, now we have the answers. How true are they now that we're this much further in, right? Mm-hmm. And to really dive deep into questions around BIPOC audiences, right? We have all these hypotheses now, but now it's really about going deeper there. Layering in some qualitative interviews with audiences of color to really add some more meaning making behind some of these findings. And then I think also, just as importantly, really probing how are people enjoying being connected digitally through the arts, right? It's like, well, we've all been doing it out of necessity. Are there some things that we can learn to carry on to the future? 100%. So it's really figuring out how we can take this moment and use it to catapult us into whatever the future holds. So that's been really exciting. And a big part of what we've been doing at LaPlaca Cohen is, like, I always say there's our sort of our client base and our sort of day jobs, right? And then there's this other crazy thing called culture track that, obviously really informs our work with our clients, but also is publicly accessible, right? So anyone can go on culturetrack.com and download the report, all of the raw data. Right? Like, we've had so many grad students and people from like all over the world take the data and splice it and dice it and come back to us with some really amazing findings that may answer just one specific thing that we hadn't thought of, but it's just been like mind-blowing to see how people have used the data. Yeah. And I should note, this was all funded by foundation. So of course it's all, not proprietary, it's publicly accessible data that anyone can use really as they see fit. So that has been what's been keeping me busy during the pandemic. I guess I should let me share with you, I think, 3 of the top things, because I think those will really help us sort of talk out, because like you can get lost in the data. So what we do at LaPlaca Cohen is we always try to take the data and create some meaning from it, right? Really actionable meaning. So the 3 things we found that people are looking for the most in this moment. Number 1, just more relaxed cultural experiences. So I think a lot of that's coming out of the fact that we've been doing them from home. But, the idea of that it's not for me thing, a lot of it has to do with the expectations of how you look when you show up, all the things we worry about that we don't need to during Zoom, right? If I'm 10 minutes into your production and I don't like it, I can leave the Zoom meeting, right? I don't have to sort of like weasel my way out of an aisle, a fancy aisle in the theater. So that's a big one, just more relaxed performances. The second thing we're finding is folks are eager for arts organizations to be of more service to their community, right? And this is the thing that this notion of being an essential service, right? Like of course, we are thankful for our first responders and our healthcare heroes, and like that is like such the most important work, right? Like we need to make sure that people are healthy and safe. But I do think it's important to include the arts as an essential service in terms of being a place for healing, for grieving, for conversations, right? One of the things we're finding, especially for BIPOC audiences, is the arts can be a provider of factual information, like the arts as a provider of just information, right, in our community. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And then the third thing we're finding is just people are hungry for programming that's more relevant to them and their lives, right? And that is the piece where, I think we can see a lot of mapping when we start looking at the ethnic racial splits from the last edition of Culture Track and this new one. Is like, okay, wow, like there are nuanced needs across disciplines, across gender, across geography, across race. And yeah, you can get scared by those differences and those wants and desires. But I think I find that when I allow myself to really like put myself in someone else's shoes and base it in data of what a certain, demographic group is looking for, it gives me such a lens into the whole experience, right? Like I love showing up to theater and seeing different audience members of different backgrounds, but like I only know what I want from the experience, right? But having data to sort of bear out what people might be looking for helps me, even as just a theater goer, understand like the role I'm playing in this shared experience. So that's been really exciting to sort of bear out like what are the differences in terms of what does the word Quo used earlier, like relevance, right? What does relevance mean to somebody? Like it's not going to be the same thing it means to me. So those are the 3 big things we've been finding and are going to continue probing when we go out with this study again in a few months.
So, I hope everybody's listening.
Buckle up, right?
We have data.
We've got data.
You wanted numbers, we got them. Okay. The man is speaking nothing but truth. All right. I can't wait for 2021 to see what happens next.
Absolutely.
Because there are many people who have been talking about the very same thing without the data. So thank you for the
Yeah.
data.
Yeah.
Because we needed some backup. So I very
Right.
much appreciate that. No, the other thing is I'm curious to see what the responses have been to the data.
Mhm.
You know, have people been believing you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, again, so many of the people that I sort of hold near and dear, right, in my life, I think I want to assume are people who will take this data and make ameliorative change to their arts organizations with it. I don't know that everyone who touches this data is going to necessarily take it and run, right? Like, but that is the goal, right? That people, and most people have been thankful, and also been, no one's disputed, no one's come for us and said, we don't believe this. I think the leap we make is that people are going to take it and run with it, and that's what we're starting to see bear out. I think that's the really exciting thing. When you go to culturetrack.com or engage with our social channels, like, we are sharing out the case studies, right? Like the organizations that have reopened safely, or have figured out virtual programming, or have found really interesting ways to be of service to their communities during, social justice protests, right? Like theater companies that were closed, but are saying, hey, come use our facilities, like, while you're out there protesting, or like those case studies, if you will, are really the things that we're sort of out there trying to shake the pom-poms about, because it's like, okay, here's what the data says. Everyone's agreeing with it because it's true, right? 125,000 people don't lie. And now here's what organizations are doing with it. And that, to me, is the thing where it's like, okay, take it and run, because it's not even something that you can't do. Most of these things we're seeing aren't things that are expensive, right? It's just really finding new, innovative, authentic ways to make the invitation to folks, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that's been really thrilling in this moment is digital as an entry point, right? And thinking about the opportunity we have there. One of the things that's been so exciting about Culture Track is we found, especially among African American audiences, the usage numbers for digital is higher than those of white and Caucasian audience members, right? So when you're confronted with those statistics, there's opportunity, right? In terms of how do we authentically then invite people who might, if you engage with us for the first time online, how do we authentically invite you into our facility when we're back up and running, right? And or how do we create digital programs for people who like found us online and are happy there, right? Like maybe they never want to show up to our building. That's okay. So the way we see it is it's both, right? You've got to keep figuring out what's your digital game plan, and then also figuring out if we've tapped into new audiences in this crazy moment, are there opportunities to really double down on that in person when we're reopened? So it's like, it's really thinking about both on a parallel path. And that's really what we're hoping to do more of when we field the rest of the study in early 2021, is helping people understand sort of how do you balance your budgets, your marketing plans, your programming to really do both of these things, right? Like authentically engage people in person, but keep turning up that content because it's working for a lot of organizations.
And then what I love so much is that you have the data, or we have the data at hand, right? So we have it, or data, we have it, it's right there. And we get to decide how we use it. We get to go in and start to ask all these wonderful creative questions. Why is this? What if I compare this to this? What if I decide to, instead of doing the disaggregate, and then I decide to split this up and start to wonder and look at specific and direct and targeted audiences.
Exactly.
I also hope that as people take this information, that they also start to understand what other steps are necessary, right? How do we take it even further? Because we can make sure that we have that touch point digitally. Let that be the first touch point. And it's like, okay, we're back open. Let those people get here. And what does it mean to get there and have a completely different and unpleasant experience? Right? Which is why it should also inform not just what programming needs to happen, or what marketing and what communication needs to happen. It should also inform what your organization should be and what the organization should do. you have said often just in service to communities and what
Mhm.
organizations should be focusing on in service to their communities,
Community.
and what it
Yeah.
means to make sure that as we try to make sure that we're relevant, or that we're trying to make sure that we're having authentic engagement, that we have those voices authentically within our organizations as well, right?
Yeah.
It's not always just, oh, I learned this, I think this is going to work, let me try this, and then let me go from there, as opposed to, I see that there is a need
Mhm.
within what we're presenting and within who we are. And this data is kind of helping us understand where we can kind of fill those places or fill those holes. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I
Well,
think for a lot of organizations, it's a combination of the data and then, as I said, just even small case studies
yeah,
that allow them to ask the question, well, what would this look like for our
for us,
organization?
yes.
And
Mhm.
often that then leads into some soul searching, which is, well, what does our organization look like, right? And on the sort of client side piece of our business at LaPlaca Cohen, we have a lot of people who come to us and want to develop a 5-year strategic plan, or really want us to lead some sort of strategic visioning around equity, diversity, inclusion. And we have to have a lot of hard conversations sometimes and say, we're so grateful that you want to do this work and want to do it with us, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Because oftentimes they're not ready for that consultant to come in, right? To help them sort of layer some thought partnership on top of that. And I think what we're seeing in this moment is, thankfully, a lot of organizations are doing that hard work on their own.
Mhm.
Many because some of their staff are asking for it. Many because their communities are demanding it. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more funders demanding these sort of questions be answered.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all music to our ears, right? Because as consultants, we've been often the ones who've had to sort of give the tough love.
Mhm.
Um, and it's tricky. It's a delicate dance, right? Because an organization that comes to you and says we want to be smarter or more inclusive, like those are wonderful things
Right.
and important things. But there's a lot of work that has to be done before you can even address a lot of these issues, right?
Absolutely.
So just
It's
again,
real.
having the data to back it up, I think really helps organizations understand the why the work is so important.
That's real. I mean, that is real talk, and we live in a well, no, and we know we live in a world that people need proof and they need to see
Yeah.
it. They need to see the numbers. Some people will take it; they'll take someone speaking about their experiences, and some people need, well, it's basically the data to make informed decisions. And there's look, whatever it takes to get the job done, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because ultimately, one of the things you said earlier on made me think, when people actually come to the space,
Mhm.
once we've engaged them digitally, and maybe they want to stay digital, and that's
Right.
fine. But what
Right.
happens when they come to the space? And
Right.
Quo and I talk often, all the time, about how you foster the environment
Mhm.
of your organization.
Yeah.
So in you deciding who you want to be, it's about who you want to be is that environment that you're fostering. And that's for the employee, that's for the patron, that's for whoever walks through those doors.
Right.
So if what it takes is your study for this start to make some improvements, then that's what it takes.
Well,
And I'm
yeah, and
happy.
and it's also just like what is the tenor of the, or not tenor, I guess, just what is the vibe that we want to foster, right? Because what we're finding, in 2017, the thing people were looking for most in cultural experiences was fun. The thing people are looking for the most right now is humor and hope, right? Again, these
Yes.
aren't surprising in light of the world we're living in, but when you see 125,000 people raise their hands to all say the same thing, then organizations
Yeah.
have to take action, right? And the thing that's really important too is we're not saying, if you're a museum presenting some really serious subject matter, or an opera company doing a really major piece about something very serious, we're not saying like, it needs to be laughy fun times all the time. You can present very serious art, but what we're saying is at some point in the experience, people need to be able to let their shoulders down, right?
Yeah.
And like
Mhm.
relax and have some hope, right? So it's also the context of the emotions that we need to be, and the
Mhm.
emotional needs that we need to be fulfilling for our, not just the people showing up at our communities, right? And that doesn't need to just be programming. It can be how you activate your facilities, how you activate your digital presence, and help fulfill some of these needs. And that's why I was trying to connect to, arts professionals in this moment of, essential service. I think we've just scratched the surface in terms of how arts organizations are going to start addressing these needs. I mean, like, here I go in my soapbox, but like we have suffered a collective loss in this nation that we haven't
Yes.
dealt with. Like we haven't started dealing with the loss.
Right.
And I think that our cultural organizations are going to be the places where we all start coming together to do that when we safely can, you know?
Yeah.
I have a friend who one time said that he thought musicians, artists, period, were almost becoming like the priests
Yes.
of the 21st century, because that's where you can really go and let go. And you go to you look into artists, you know, you're looking for art spaces to go and sort of have sometimes even that cathartic experience, you know, of just, you know, being in a room. Sometimes it's just cathartic to let it all out. And if it takes a, you know, I don't know, a la boheme, you know, for you to let it all out and truly mourn. Sometimes that's what it is. And I don't know. This is such a good episode. I'm so excited. So what are some of the steps that you think that are going to be needed to make the most of the data?
Yeah. So our firm is working on, you know, I think lots of folks in the arts, you know, arts organizations or service firms like ours, you know, really move through this moment and have come out on the other side with their own statements in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion, right? So like, you know, everyone's free to go to LaPlacaCohen.com. Like we have ours like everyone else. But I think part of what we really wanted to get right was how can we hold a mirror up to the field and really force clients to take action, right? So what our firm is committed to is we're developing an equity assessment that allows us to sit down with our current clients, potential clients, and the field at large and look at a checklist that really helps organizations analyze who makes up your community, who makes up your staff, your artists, your audiences, your vendors, et cetera. Just starting there as a baseline is pretty simple to do. And then, you know, layering on top of that questions about marketing, about fundraising, about programming. You know, I'm a marketer, so like that's the piece that I own. But you know, connecting to what I said earlier about I sort of, you know, entered the field at the really the burgeoning of the digital media movement in the arts. What's great about digital media is it's really cost efficient, right? Like I can find, you know, I know who clicks on my ad, I know who comes to our opera, so I'm going to find more people like that. What happens is those people start looking and acting the same. So as a marketer, the question I'm asking now is, look at your media mix, right? If you're only doing very targeted digital advertising, who are you leaving out of the conversation, right? It goes back to the 125,000 people, the inherent whiteness of those lists, right? It's not even necessarily that your programming wouldn't speak to somebody who's of a different background. It's that they didn't even know it was an option, right? So like it's taking a step back to say, we've gotten so smart in terms of using digital to be cost efficient, to be hyper targeted, to deepen engagement, but how has it been limiting our ability to broaden and diversify, right? And it sounds silly, but good old fashioned like radio advertising on local stations and like really being smart about print ads and billboards in certain places in town, like those actually can really help you make inroads with folks who you're never going to reach digitally because you've been so hyper focused on just finding more people who are buying tickets, right? So that just as a marketer, in terms of the notion of equity assessment, even in the last few months, having conversations about, well, what are you guys doing in your media plan? Like, it sounds so simple, right? And it is. It shouldn't be. This stuff shouldn't be hard. That thing I keep saying, like, it's not hard. You sort of hold the mirror up and then you ask like 2 or 3 questions. And most people, I think most honest people, come to it on their own, you know, because the intentions, I really think the intentions, at least in the marketing sort of, you know, lane where I live, weren't all that bad. It was really, I think, about trying to be efficient. And through that efficiency, I think we've left a lot of people out of the conversation. So it's really finding new ways and new media tactics to really broaden and make sure we're talking to more folks, you know?
And then even the catch 22 in that, and kind of feeding into your own expectations and what that means as this is all you're focused on. So then suddenly this becomes standard.
Right.
And because you are seeing what you're looking for, you're seeing that these are the people who buy tickets. Those people don't buy tickets. They don't come here. They don't care. as opposed to, no, you see these people buying tickets, or you see this group, this demographic engaging in this way, because that's where you focused everything on.
Yeah.
And then therefore that's what you're thinking about when you continue to program, when you're continuing to do your work, when you're continuing to go out and engage with the community. You still have this in mind, as opposed to how you expand that, like, well, who else is missing? And so much of this really is that creative process. But if you are only kind of a results driven type of organization, and you don't want to pay attention to the people, you don't want to pay attention to the process, and you're only focused on the art, quotation marks, the art, then it becomes this thing where you define everything by this experience or what you're seeing, as opposed to going through that creative process of asking the questions. Okay, this is what we have. What does everybody else need? What do we need to do? What things can we change? How can we start to make sure we incorporate this in what we're doing? Why haven't we asked these questions before? Who was answering the questions when we were asking them before? Who's answering them now, right? And so just being inquisitive and being creative about the resources that we have, because we do have them. They're here. We'll figure it out. It's just a matter of how we go about that journey.
Well, and what's so wild, even I think just in the last few years, you know, when we fielded Culture Track in 2017, our big sort of thesis statement was the democratization of culture, right? Which is a big way of saying, like, the definition of culture is just blowing apart at the seams, right? We went out and fielded a study, and, you know, people used to say, you know, opera, symphony, ballet, theater, museums, historic attraction. There's maybe 7 or 8 things people categorize broadly as culture. Very quickly, we started seeing, you know, music festivals, food trucks, street festivals, street art, like all these other things that the traditional arts have thumbed their noses at. Cultural consumers who we need, right? Like, if you're an opera company who says, oh, we don't really want to market to people who go to street fairs, well, why not, right? So the thing we've been trying to do between that version of the study and this one is really start cross-pollinating to say, you know, wow, like, could you have a couple food trucks pull up next? Like, what would that mean? Right? Like, food is an entry point to your organization. Is that a bad thing? I don't know, right? So asking those questions have been really interesting. And it's forged a lot of, I think, you know, active partnerships among organizations across certain communities and towns. What we're seeing now is we're almost beyond that, right? Like, the notion of, like, we are not the ones who will define what culture is in our society, right? The people are doing that. So all we can do as arts marketers is listen to what they want and figure out if we can serve one of those needs. And knowing that the answer might be no, right? It might if we are true, if we are an organization centered, you know, leader somewhere, and I develop my season, and, you know, that might not speak to everyone, right? But if you flip it and reverse it and take a more community centered approach, you might start altering your programming to sort of fit different sort of definitions of culture, right? Like, an opera company presenting at a music festival, like, that isn't a stretch to me, right? But it would have been, I think, for arts marketers and arts administrators like 4 or 5 years ago. Now, I think, honestly, part of the beauty, I think, of this moment is we're going to be so, really frankly, just desperate. Once we're all back and gathering in large mass, it's going to be really competitive. We're all going to be competing for the same audiences. And I think there's going to be great opportunity there to sort of shift a bit in terms of how we define our products and who they serve, right?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, to say the least.
It's going to be interesting.
Really is.
And I would love to do, like, a food festival opera thing, like, sign me up. That sounds great.
I mean, we've seen small snippets of that. I mean, you know, for a while during lunch at the Winspear Opera House, there was a line of food trucks all up and down the Arts District.
I love that.
And I'm telling you, people would be coming out of the buildings from everywhere. Spaces, the performing Booker T. Washington High School for the performing and visual arts across the street. I mean, it was just insane. And I was like, but this is Texas, okay? This is the South. We like to eat. Okay?
I mean, everybody likes to eat.
Everybody likes to eat, but I'm just saying, like, in the South, you have a truck with chicken and waffles on it. Fried chicken and waffles in the South. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. But it to me, it's like mixing those worlds that people deemed unmixable before. Those artistic standards. And those things that have that have held us back more than they've progressed us. That's the things that I see all of this this pause that we're having to take right now for traditional ways of doing things. I see that sort of being turned on its head for that reason. More of that thinking is coming into line right now. They're like, well, maybe we can do this another way, and this is good.
Yeah. And then in noticing that as we're breaking those silos, we're also breaking those boundaries in communities. As we are breaking those silos between what art is art and what is culture, and how that has been forced, or that definition has been forced because certain cultures and communities did not count. So if you don't do these things, you don't count as culture. And so no longer are the others, no longer is opera, ballet, symphony the primary portion of culture, because so many people have been locked out for so long.
Yeah, and what I think is so beautiful is it's secular, right? So it's not just finding a place for the traditional arts in the sort of hip, less traditional areas. It's also the opposite. It's, because of this moment, what we're finding is there are audiences who've never been exposed to things like chamber music societies, who through the internet and through, frankly, being cooped up inside for 2 months, saw maybe a pre-roll video and clicked on it, and boom, they're off watching an hour-long chamber symphony orchestra, production. And that to me is really exciting, because it allows us to think about the cycle of the arts, right? The life cycle of an organization, of a discipline even, right? And we talk so much about ballet, symphonies, orchestras, operas, and sort of, the death and all that craziness. And I don't know, I'm really excited about what we're going to see on the other side of this in terms of new audiences. Absolutely. And then what that means for the delivery mechanism of those products, right? And it might not be in person, and the thing I would say to clients is like, that's okay, right? It doesn't mean what you've been doing is wrong. And chances are it's still going to continue, right? Like I'm a theater person. I can't wait to get back into a crowded theater. And I mean a crowded theater when I can do that, right? But in the meantime, I'm enjoying some of what I'm seeing, and the uses of Zoom through telling stories has been mind-blowing. So, and I want them both to continue, right? And I think we're going to see them both continue.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be necessary for them both continue, but I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's so cool, because all of a sudden you have this 2-track parallel kind of thing, where you have the traditional live stage, but you also have this idea of this digital world, and the two don't have to be these two separate, polar opposite type things anymore.
That can just be one whole part of what the organization does, and how it serves communities in different ways. Just like so often symphonies will have your pops, and you have your classical, and then you have your all these other. No, this is just another way in which we serve, or in which we co-create, and in which we bring our product to others. So absolutely.
Right. And what it means for like makers, right? That it's not the financial sort of like barrier to entry as a creator. The threshold's so much lower when it's digital, right? That you can just make it happen. You don't need the space to rehearse or any of those sort of fixed costs. So that is really exciting, I think, too, just from the other side, right? Like, I just am thinking about the marketers of the next generation. We're going to be marketing not just in person, but also virtual, right? So how do you as a marketer start flexing across both of those sort of places and place and placelessness in terms of even marketing, a fundraising? I think we're all going to have to really have a foot in both worlds, at least for the next few years.
So good. All right. We are just about out of time, but I want to ask you just one final question. What advice do you have for others, particularly during the time that we're in right now? You said it earlier, we have 3 different things going on right now. Amongst many others, but 3 really large ones, that have been going on. So what advice do you have for others?
My biggest piece of advice is the thing that I'm really trying to encourage myself to continue doing, which is seek out things that you didn't experience in person before, right? And the way I'll manifest this is, I was walking down the street, in New York City, and because everything's outside now, everyone's dining outside. You see all the different crowds outside. And there was a restaurant I walked by a million times, and I never saw anyone in there because I wasn't actually going inside. And there were all these people sitting outside. And I turned to my friend, I was like, who knew about that place? And he was like, they did. Those people knew about that place.
Yeah.
Right? So it sounds so silly, but it was this moment of revelation for me. It's like, I think about all of the cultural organizations that I assume to know what they're doing, right? But it's not for me. Like I might not want to go to your dance company, but I walk by your building and it looks very nice. I've been encouraging myself to engage not just with the organizations that I love online, but those that I've decided for whatever reason weren't for me. And use this moment, again, very low cost, if not free, low touch, right? That if it is indeed not for me after 5 minutes, then great, I tried it. But I've really been encouraging myself to like show up to virtual programming for different types of disciplines or companies that for whatever reason just never were on my radar or I didn't think were for me. And it's amazing because there's some that I'm like, wow, okay, I was wrong. And then there's a few where I'm like, you know what? That is not for me, and that's okay, right? But it's like this moment of taste testing is really beautiful, and I think that it allows you to. It's not just about the art or the experience, but it's also the delivery mechanisms are so different for different organizations, right? So that if you're like a theater person and you're seeing all the virtual stuff that's happening in theater, that's great. But it's like, oh, come over here to the gallery space, because if you could see what's happening with the virtual galleries, like there are probably some learnings for you there as a theater person. So I don't know. I recommend everyone just cross-pollinate and just like taste test. Use this moment to just 5 minutes in a little Zoom room to watch a dance piece that you thought wasn't for you. It might be after all.
Fantastic. That's good advice. I dig it. All right. This is the time we go to Quo for positive notes.
Yes.
Positive notes. As always, listen to Michael.
Yes, please listen to this man.
But in listening, be mindful of what it means to connect in a way that matters to you. And knowing that there is connection out there, you just have to be bold enough to try it. Mm-hmm. And then to have the grace to continue to extend connection to others. This is speaking to arts administrators, is speaking to leaders of arts organizations. This is speaking to artists. This is speaking to everyone. We all have something to give in this field. We all have something to receive in this field, and that giving and receiving is going to continue regardless of where we are in the nation, right? Art is not going to go away. Opera is not going to go away. We will continue to create. So be creative in that co-creation that is necessary for us to be relevant, that is necessary for us to be sustainable, that is necessary for us to truly have a place within one another and within other communities. It's a matter of extending that, clinging to it, holding on to it, and of course, knowing that you don't have to do it alone. So again, listen to Michael. Be creative. The data is there. Use it. Ask the questions. Be bold enough to seek those answers. And then take heart knowing that you don't have to do it alone. And those are my positive notes. But Michael has to.
So Michael, thank you so much, Michael, for being here today. It has been so incredibly informative and inspirational, and just all around good stuff. And folks out there, please pay attention. Like Quo said, listen to this man. He's go to his website, go to the website, check out this study, look for the new study in 2021. Michael, do you know when we can expect that, or is that going to be or can we tell people that right now?
If folks want to visit culturetrack.com, there will be a call for organizations to participate in early 2021. So stay tuned. But yeah, I just encourage everyone just to revel in the data and then take it and run, because we need people out in the field using it and really activating our communities through the arts.
All right. You heard him, folks. Thank you all for joining us. Be bold, be brave, be creative. And as always, we will see you next week.
Have a good one.